Unfortunately, I didn't listen to those people because I
Okay.
thought, when I woke up every morning, I thought, what do I really want to accomplish? What will get me up in the morning? And what got me up and still gets me up every morning is developing new technologies that can help human health. The thing I've learned throughout my career and, again, the over 12 companies that I have formed, there's not one true pathway every time. The pathway to go from research to a startup company to a product that can help humans, it has been different for me. For all of the products that we have out there in humans, it's followed a different pathway. So you have to be flexible. But we need sensors in the body that can communicate to handheld devices and tell you, are you going to get cancer? Do you have an infection? And this is all before you would step into a hospital. That is deep tech. And I can't think of a better place that these technologies are used than in rural areas in Africa.
DEVoice.
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 Healthcare is now shaped by technology. From implants to nanoparticles, researchers and startups are working hand in hand on incredible deep tech innovations. What are the main goals of nanosciences in developing new ways of fighting epidemics, viruses, and cancers? What role must universities play in bringing disruptive solutions to support researchers and pushing the boundaries of R&D to market and business development? For this DeVoice episode, we welcome Professor Thomas Webster. Professor Webster holds degrees in chemical engineering from the University of Pittsburgh and a PhD in biomedical engineering from RPI. He has served as a professor at Purdue, Brown, and Northeastern Universities, and founded over a dozen companies with FDA-approved medical products. His technology benefits over 30,000 patients and contributes to sustainability. Currently, Professor Webster serves at Brown University and several other institutions worldwide. He has received numerous accolades, including being named a World Top 2% Scientist by Citations and a clarified Top 0.1% Most Influential Researcher. With over 1,350 publications, Professor Webster is a leading figure in nanoscience and biomedical engineering. Last but not least, Professor Webster was nominated to the Nobel Prize of Chemistry in 2022, a nomination he described as an honor to his career.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of DEVoice, the voice of entrepreneurship and venturing at University Mohammed VI Polytechnic. Happy to be here today with an esteemed guest, Professor Thomas Webster. He is a very well-known researcher, entrepreneur, and we will talk about how R&D can trigger new business market and how did he become an entrepreneur by launching startups. Good morning, Professor.
Hi, how are you? Great to see you.
I'm fine. Thank you to be here today with us. We are at Ben Green and you are at Boston in USA, isn't it? Thank you.
Yes, right now I'm in Boston, but I travel quite frequently. So yes, right now I'm in Boston.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, please, as an academic entrepreneur, how will you summarize your career and specifically how you manage balancing the roles of researcher and entrepreneur?
Yes, these are great questions. And as we all know, we only have 24 hours in a day. So you have to be smart, right? You have to be very smart about how you use those hours. To me, I've been able to do everything that we've been able to do because of the team that I've surrounded myself with. I'm convinced if you surround yourself with great people, people who are interested in your well-being, smart, innovative, take risks, then that 24 hours in a day can expand and can feel like 48
Yes.
hours, 96 hours. So to me, it's really all about the team. And I've been blessed throughout my career to have had fantastic students who conduct world-class research, but most importantly, students who ask tough questions. You know, we often look at a university and sometimes criticize what research is being done at universities as being too safe. You know, people want degrees. They want a PhD. They want a master's. Maybe they want an honors thesis based on research as a bachelor's of science student. But a lot of times those projects are very safe. They're small steps that we take. And in my field of medicine, those small steps won't get us very far, unfortunately. So I've been very happy to have students who take big risks and really form that environment, that ecosystem of creative thought, everybody helping each other, a team kind of atmosphere, which doesn't always happen, but if you can get it to happen, I think you can do great things with your research.
Okay. And then how can you manage the fact that you are traveling throughout two planets, R&D and startup?
Yes. So, and this is also a wonderful question. And I would say I started as an assistant professor at a university.
Okay.
And when I was an assistant professor, that university told me don't pursue startup activities because it will not get you tenure. You won't get promoted unless you publish papers, unless you get
Yes.
grants, you get funding, all of these checkbox. Fortunately, I didn't listen to those people because I
Okay.
thought, you know, when I woke up every morning, I thought, what do I really want to accomplish? What will get me up in the morning? And what got me up and still gets me up every morning is developing new technologies that can help human health. So I learned very early on that you cannot have your research be meaningful unless you're spinning it out into a company, unless you're working with an existing company. Somehow you have to find somebody in business who can help with the business plan, the regulatory aspects in terms of my research in biomaterials, the raising of funds to hire consultants to do more studies. I mean, there's a lot of work that has to be done on the business side that I can't do. And I have to rely on good people, but also the thing that keeps driving me is just knowing that if I want my research to be meaningful, I can't rely on somebody reading my paper and expecting a medical product to turn out of my paper that I published. I have to be much more proactive. I have to look for business, engage with business, and try to get entrepreneurs and other people in the business world to pick up my technologies and develop products. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But that to
Yes.
me is where the focus needs to be. You know, as a senior faculty member, I would never tell an assistant professor or somebody new to the field, a graduate student or undergraduate student, I would never say you cannot do entrepreneurial startup work while you're trying to get tenure or while you're trying to secure, you know, your position in academia. Because to me, the biggest impact the biggest impact of our research is whether we develop a product that helps human health. It's not an impact factor on a journal. It's not how many people show up to your presentation at an academic society. To me, it's how many people are you helping with what you're doing in the lab. And that's the definition of impact. And again, I've been so happy to be surrounded by people who value that and see that also in themselves.
Yes, indeed. You talk about people like talents team. you talk also about impact that may address humanity's most urgent crisis, and how can universities play a big role to support startups in research, to make a kind of bridge or a platform to gather them, helping the human crisis?
Yes, excellent question again. So I've been at 3 different universities in my career. So I've had a good opportunity to see who does it well and who does not do it well. And I can say from my point of view, the places
those who which are doing in the good way, like UM60P also.
Yes, absolutely. So the places that do it well, first of all, are supportive. And they're not just supportive in terms of, at a meeting, nice job, Professor Webster. We love what you're doing with nanotechnology. I mean, that's nice, but, and maybe that can help you get through a day where you didn't get a grant, and you get some positive encouragement from people. So that can certainly help. But I think a university who really wants to make an impact in startup companies, in new technologies, in deep tech, for example, they have to have the resources and want to spend the resources to help their faculty and student research. So that means seed grants. If I remember correctly, one of the first medical products that I developed that's in humans now started with a seed grant from a university. It was a crazy idea we had. We knew the federal government, NIH, NSF here in the United States would not fund this because it was just crazy. But the university took a chance. The university took a chance on our idea, gave us some seed funding. We were able to do some preliminary experiments. Then, of course, this was again back when I was an assistant professor. I didn't know what to do. We had great results. We had a great idea. Now what? Well, I could go back to part of our university. Most universities have a technology transfer office. And I reported these results and I described how excited we were and how I think this could really change orthopedics. And they said, well, here's the next step, file for a patent. So I followed their advice. We filed for a patent. Then I said, now what? I don't, great. I have my first patent application. Now what? And they said, look for an entrepreneur who can start a company around your idea. And not only did they say, look for an entrepreneur, but they said, we're going to help you find one. We're going to hold an event, a poster session where you can describe your results to entrepreneurs. We're going to do, all these outreach activities to try to get people interested in your technology. And they found somebody. Now, of course, the person they found was not an entrepreneur, but was an investor. So he was not interested in running the company. He was interested in just financially supporting the company. So we had to then look for an entrepreneur. I was, full-time research teaching professor at that university. So I was not the CEO at this company when it first started, but we found a CEO. And then we said, okay, now what? And then we said more experiments. So we applied for funding, got more experiments. Now what? Get regulatory approval. We got regulatory approval. Now what? Find surgeons who can implant and want to implant your material. We did that. And now, 10 years later, we're in 30,000 patients. This is an orthopedic device in the spine that's in 30,000 patients, and none have failed. There's been no cases of infection, no cases of implant loosening, no cases of chronic inflammation. And to give you an idea, the industry standard is about 5 to 10% failure. So the fact that we were able to now have an implant, get it through the process into humans, and 30,000 have been implanted with no cases of failure, that to me, that's my dream. And that's, what
success story.
Right. That university started with a seed fund. And without that, none of everything else would have happened. So there's a lot that universities can do to support their researchers, support their faculty. But again, we have to take big steps in medicine. We can't take small steps that we see a lot in terms of research. We have to take risks. So creating a culture of taking risks is also something a university can embrace. You know, not just embracing the successes, but when you take risks, you fail a lot.
Yes.
So you have to address the failures and highlight the failures and not treat them as failures, but treat them as learning experiences that are helping us improve whatever that technology is.
Thank you. And we will talk about failure sooner. But before that, as you said, the role of university, UM6P organized May 9 and 10, the first edition of DeepTech Summit. And we will also launch the second edition next year. And the main goal was to establish an African platform for the DeepTech players, researchers, startups, VCs, etc. From your expertise, how can DeepTech succeed in Africa, and what are the main challenges, maybe like in healthcare?
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, for good and for bad, we have significant challenges in healthcare. And of course, we are all familiar with COVID. We're all too familiar with COVID. And I fear one of the things that's happening today all around the world is we are forgetting what got us into COVID in the first place. You know, viruses are nothing new. We've had viruses, you know, forever here on Earth. So we should have been better prepared. And right now we need to be learning our lessons from COVID. And one of those key lessons is not only to be better prepared in terms of deep tech, science breakthroughs, technology breakthroughs in medicine, but also how healthcare in one part of the world affects the whole world. For some reason, people are not getting this. And I can't understand it, you know, because what we have learned through COVID is where there's one viral outbreak, because of how fast things move today, how quickly people travel, you know, it spreads, and it spreads very quickly. So we have to not only look at technologies that help everybody in the world, but we also have to, in my opinion, completely revolutionize medicine. When most people think of medicine or healthcare, you think of a hospital, and you think of this brick building that was probably built maybe 100 years ago, 50 years ago. Yes, there are some new hospitals which are wonderful, but the concept of a hospital is very old-fashioned. The concept that you have something that hurts you, so you go into the hospital, you go to the emergency room, you get care, you find out what the problem is. That concept needs to go. And if you think about all the other technologies we have in this world, and here's one that has revolutionized the world, my cell phone.
Indeed.
If you can think about how everyday technologies can help diagnose if you have a problem and treat that problem, we don't need hospitals. And that means we can give healthcare to wherever people are. If they're, you know, a far distance from a hospital, doesn't matter. They have a personal device that can diagnose a disease and treat that disease. If they don't have the means to get proper healthcare, unfortunately here in the United States, you get better healthcare the more wealthy you are. That's wrong. So we can have devices that can reduce costs and allow you to do healthcare at home. And the other thing that came out of COVID, which is very interesting, is there's a lot of people with psychological, or I should say, barriers, emotional barriers, personal barriers to even going to see help. For example, I'm 52 years old and I'm a male. I'm less likely to get healthcare than a female who is at my age, or an older female or a younger female. So the fact that I'm less likely to get healthcare That's a problem, because what if I had COVID? What if I had some new virus? I need to have accessible technologies at home that can help diagnose a healthcare problem and treat that healthcare problem. That, to me, is where deep tech in Africa can extremely help, where we are developing technologies that can be used anywhere. They're based in science, they're based in sensors, they're based in technology, not just wearable sensors. You know, I'm wearing an iWatch too, big fan of those devices, but we need sensors in the body that can communicate to handheld devices and tell you, are you going to get cancer? Do you have an infection? And this is all before you would step into a hospital. That is deep tech. And I can't think of a better place that these technologies are used than in rural areas in Africa, especially areas that don't have access to healthcare or access to, you know, X-ray machines, MRIs, these huge instruments that now we can fit on our iPhone. I don't know if your listeners realize this, but you can now put an ultrasound on an iPhone, on a cell phone. That is revolutionary, because that means you can now take an instrument that was once only available in a hospital, and it can do more than look at pregnancy. It can do more than, you know, analyze orthopedic soft tissue injuries, but ultrasound can be a treatment platform. It can break up bacteria. So if we now have an ultrasound at your home, think of the possibilities of you taking control over your own health, being able to treat your own diseases without needing this archaic, old-fashioned hospital system, which is very ineffective and very expensive.
Yes, thank you, Professor. You're right, because in Africa, we have a lack of infrastructure in healthcare, in others main pain point that show how developing some kind of digital solution in healthcare can save many lives in this continent. Thank you. Let's deep dive into nanosciences. Your research focuses on using nanoparticles to kill cancer cells. What is your scientific approach, and how do you envision bringing this technology to the market?
Yes, absolutely. So, and this is another great example of how we need to take risks, right? Stop playing it safe for research that is done at universities as well as at companies. You know, we don't hear a lot about research done at companies. So, you know, because of secrecy and developing products and things like that. But when I was a graduate student at a university, I came up with the simple idea that nanoparticles are everywhere in your body. If you look at bone, for example, healthy, living bone, it is composed of nanoparticles. They are calcium phosphate particles, right? This is why we drink milk to get that calcium. But that calcium turns into nanoparticles in our bone. So the very simple, you know, back in 1995, very simple hypothesis was, if we have nanoparticles in bone already, wouldn't they serve as better medical devices? Because your cells are used to nanoparticles, they make nanoparticles, and they're around nanoparticles. So we started, you know, what is that? Is that 30 years ago, I guess? Ouch. I guess I'm not as young as I thought I was. So 30 years ago, we started making implants out of nanoparticles. Orthopedic implants is where we started. We have since moved into many other fields. And the thing we noticed, which shouldn't have been so surprising to us, was cells, bone cells, they're called osteoblasts. They make more bone on implants made out of nanoparticles than those that were being used at that time. And traditional implants are not made out of nanoparticles. They don't have nanotextures. They don't have anything nano associated with them. So we simply saw that no matter what chemistry you did this for, titanium, stainless steel, whatever chemistry you would do this for, make it nano, and you could improve bone growth. So that one simple experiment, which we took through in vitro, in vivo, and then formed a company, as I mentioned before, who got this implant through the FDA, that one simple high-risk kind of experiment is what led it all for us. Since then, we have found out that nanoparticles can kill bacteria. Nanoparticles can kill cancer cells. Nanoparticles can reduce inflammation or scar tissue growth that might occur in your body. So these nanoparticles are fascinating, and we've spent a lot of time looking at fundamentally why, right? One of the other things that unfortunately people in research fields don't do is they don't ask enough why, right? Especially in my field of biomaterials, we have a history of trial and error. You know, titanium, lightweight and strong. Let's try it as a hip implant, right? Stainless steel, it's nice and strong and sturdy. It could be a great hip implant, right? We just see these things, try them, and then if they don't work, we move on to something new. But these nanomaterials, there's a real scientific reason to study them. Nanoparticles have higher energy, surface energy. And surface energy, you can think of it as putting a drop of water on a desk or a table. If that drop of water spreads more, it's hydrophilic. It has high surface energy. Most of the materials we implant in the body do not have high surface energy. But yet nanoparticles, because of their high surface area to volume ratio, they have high surface energy. This enables them to interact with proteins that promote bone growth, promote bone cells, limit infection, and limit inflammation. So that whole scientific mechanism has been figured out. And we sort of led some of that, my research group, to figure that out. So there's not only great data surrounding these nanomaterials in the body, but there's also a fundamental reason why these surfaces work. So I'm happy to say now, if you look at the FDA registry, you'll find close to 60 products that are using nanotechnology, that everything from fighting tumors to, you know, the vaccine for COVID used a nanomaterial. We didn't develop it, of course, but it's a liposome, a nanoparticle made out of the same chemical components as a cell membrane. So that's another example of a nanoparticle that has helped the lives of millions by having a vaccine for COVID. But nanoparticles are also being used to fight infection, to fight inflammatory diseases. Nanoparticles are now being used that can penetrate the blood-brain barrier to fight things like Alzheimer's disease. Or if you have a stroke and part of your brain is not functioning correctly, nanoparticles are small enough to go through the blood-brain barrier. They have an appropriate energy that can stimulate those neural cells to function. You're also finding nanomaterials in heart patches. So one of the big problems we have in healthcare today is if you have a heart attack, part of your heart dies. And of course, nobody wants to fool around with the heart. So if it's not a big damage to the heart, it's a smaller heart attack, most cardiovascular surgeons will not do anything. You'll get blood thinners, you know, some prescriptions, but we're not operating on the heart. Well, we have developed an injectable material that you can inject into the damaged part of the heart. It goes from a liquid to a solid. It's conductive because it contains nanoparticles that are conductive, and that helps the heart beat again. So there's now nanoparticles everywhere in the body that people are exploring. And I think we're really at the tip of the iceberg, because I think the more we get these nanomaterials in humans, the more positive results we're seeing.
Thank you, Professor. Very enriched examples and amazing stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
And as an entrepreneur, because you launch a dozen of startups or accompany them how do you manage failure and also the lack of funding?
Yeah, so, and of course, the funding for startups matches how
Yeah,
the
indeed.
global economy is working, right? So, if you remember in the late 2000s, like 2008, 2010, it was a tough economic time. There was a housing crisis, there was all these issues. So, that was a very difficult time to start companies. Fortunately, in medicine, it's not as affected as much by the economy because everybody always has medical problems. So we always have this high interest in funding some of our technologies. But, of course, not all of my startup companies have survived, right? Much to my dismay, some of them have just failed. They weren't able to raise money. The technologies were considered too risky, too ahead of the time, perhaps, just things that were not going to be funded. In fact, one of the examples of a company that did not work, we've revised the company and it has since been doing very well. But back in 2010, this was an implantable sensor. So we would grow, and we are growing, sensors off of the surface of implants. And those sensors in your body can communicate to a handheld device to tell you, in the case of orthopedics, is your implant infected? Or are bone cells, have they attached to your implant? Or have inflammatory cells attached to your implant? So the sensors on the implant can tell you in real time what's happening around that surface. So to show you a failure, there were a lot of failures in this idea. And one of the failures was we disclosed this to file for a patent. And of course, when I work for a university, everything I do is owned by the university. So the university has to decide whether to apply for a patent or not. So we disclosed this implantable sensor to the university I was at the time, and they said no. They said, we don't think this idea is patentable. We don't think it's going to be successful. And of course, I was, devastated. I could not understand, as most researchers, right? You can't understand why people are not super excited about your idea, right? You're so in the weeds and doing the research that it escapes you that somebody might not like what you're doing. So that was the first hurdle. Of course, in a great sense, I then I got the university to release that patent to me. So if a university ever does not file for a patent for you, you can get them to release it back to you. They release all liability. They're not interested in patenting it, and you can do it yourself as an independent person. So I did that. As an independent person, I filed for a patent. We received the patent, and now just about 5 years ago, we restarted this company, and we now have a major deal with an orthopedic implant company to grow sensors off of their implants. So it kind of shows you that, there are ups and downs, but if you believe in an idea enough, if you think that this idea is, the next great thing to medicine, don't give up. Don't give up on these obstacles that are in your face. Fight through them. Maybe it's not the right time to introduce a certain technology. Maybe your university doesn't like it, but don't let that stop you if you believe in it. And keep on going, because in this example, we are now in communications with the FDA on getting this approved. So we've been able to not only salvage this idea, but it's now succeeding in the medical device area.
Thank you, Professor. And what would be your last advice for young researchers who would like to transition into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think it's meeting people who have done it. So, I'm happy to always talk to people who are interested in this area. But the thing I've learned throughout my career, and, again, the over 12 companies that I have formed, there's not one true pathway every time. The pathway to go from research to a startup company to a product that can help humans, it has been different for me. For all of the products that we have out there in humans, it's followed a different pathway. So you have to be flexible, right? You can't think that you're going to have step 1, step 2, step 3, because something will happen. And you can't be rigid. A lot of scientists tend to be very protocol driven, right? Step 1, add this chemical to that chemical. Exactly. So be flexible. But the other, just talk to people, learn from their experiences, and most importantly, don't give up, on your idea, because if you look at all the great ideas that are out there, they come from high risk ideas. So they were all risky concepts in the beginning, and people did not give up. They believed in those ideas, and they just kept on pushing, being flexible, and kept on going until they got a product. It reminds me too of the electric car, right? If you read stories about the electric car, back in the 1980s, we had technology for electric cars, but it was the large automobile companies that were trying to suppress this new technology because they obviously wanted to stick with their gas run cars. Yeah. But the people who first developed electric cars, they didn't give up. A couple of those companies went bankrupt, but they did not give up. They took a big risk. How can we develop a car that drives through electricity alone? Back, when this was first developed, that was a huge risk. Nobody was thinking about this. And then they had economic problems, they had financial problems, but they persisted. And now we have, mandates of the certain percentage of cars need to be electric in certain parts of the world by 2050. So think about that field and how they've been able to succeed by pushing and pushing and not giving up. We have to do the same thing in medicine, or we're going to be stuck with these old-fashioned hospitals, with being caught by surprise by viruses, where our only solution is to stay home and not interact with one another. I mean, these are not good healthcare solutions. We have got to push harder in healthcare and involve technology to help us improve global healthcare.
Thank you a lot, Professor Thomas Webster, having us making this kind of journey or traveling into nanosciences, into success, failure, entrepreneurship, researching, etc. Thank you a lot. And it was a pleasure to having you today for our second episode of DEVoice. Thank you.
Great. And thank you too. Efforts like what you're doing help get the message out there, help motivate people to do entrepreneurship. So we have to do a lot more of this outreach and motivating the next generation to do this kind of research. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.